Okay, welcome to Murder Night Extravaganza, the last one, I guess. I'm gonna miss
Until
that.
we do it again.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss that that intro a lot. But I'm here with as always with Andy, my beautiful co-host, Gigi Michael from Parallax Views, and Deborah Voorhees, who was Tina in Friday the 13th 5, Part 5, New Beginning, right? And also recently directed a movie called 13 Fanboy, which is kind of I guess, continuing the franchise without actually continuing the franchise. It's a meta slash.
Maybe a spin-off.
Yeah. So I told Andy he'd go first with questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the big question I had, what I loved about the movie was that not only did you bring back a lot of the people from the films, but it's that they actually have like really good parts too. A lot of
Right.
times I was talking to my wife about the show La Brea and how I love Natalie Z, but like the show is terrible and she's so much better than that material. And that by the time you get to you master your craft in Hollywood, you're all of a sudden too old to do anything. So
Right.
it's absolutely wonderful to see all these wonderful actresses coming back and picking up where they showing that they still have what it had what it takes to make the films. Was that actually part of the your idea of doing this, was to be able to allow these actresses to come back and really shine?
I would say that it was a nice perk that came with it, but definitely not it. My main goal, anytime I'm doing any project, is not to meet some kind of quota, but to find the best people and find the best storyline. And I felt like all of these particular actors fit our storyline really well. I don't know if you noticed, but each one of them, with only two exceptions, had something very distinctly that was about them in true life. Well, actually, I was going to say not Judy Aronson, but she actually does live in a very nice place and stuff. So that one kind of fit with her. But for the most part, for example, like Kane, he really has had trouble with going in for auditions and being rejected simply because they had him typecast and felt like I can't see him doing anything else. And
And I loved his death scene, by the way. That was great.
well, and one thing that was very, very special about it, that whole thing about his father, that was true.
Oh wow.
That actually came from his true life story. And it was such a beautiful and tender and loving moment on the set. I have to say that most people teared up on that. And if they didn't, it still really touched them. I go over at one point and I go to talk to Kane. We're doing a couple different takes and stuff, and I'm checking on him. Anytime it's a really tender scene like that, you want to make sure your actor's okay and talk to him and stuff. And I heard somebody over here say, that was my father. Somebody over here said, that was my grandfather. So it was like this moment where so many people can relate to how he feels. And, for Dee Wallace, she played Dee Wallace, not really as one of the things that made it the spookiest for a lot of actors is I didn't ask them to come on and play a character who's being stalked. I asked them to come on and play themselves being stalked. And that's totally different. That's way, way scarier feeling. Sorry, my phone, I want to make sure it doesn't ring on us. I mean, it gave more than myself pause. I definitely was like, no, are you sure we want to do this? Of course, my producing partner was, oh, yes. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's not your ass on the line here.
No.
No, I'm teasing. That Joel's great. My producing partner is Joel Paul Reisig, but he, I mean, he was dead on. We really, it was the right way for us to go. But it did take me a few days of mulling over the idea before I was like, okay, let's do it.
How much of the writing process was collaborative with the actors? Like, was it largely improvised in some sense, or like the conversations within the movie? Or
I did talk to each person or I tried to talk to each person and ask them some of their history to understand. In Kane's case, I learned it more secondhand than talking to him directly. But, you know, I talked to Jennifer, I talked to the different people in the film. Tracy Savage, she was a broadcast journalist for many, many years in Los Angeles, and she is a professor. So that's why that's in there. I wrote that specifically for her, with her in mind. And even for like my role, I'm a very protective type person. And so I wrote that because I felt it fit me. Right.
I like the fact that, you know, since you're the first, it's almost like you're sacrificing yourself to show, you know, the other actors and actresses that, like, listen, I'm making that sacrifice in the beginning of the film, you know, and putting myself into that position just as much as everybody else is.
You hit it dead on. That's exactly right. You know, initially I decided I really didn't want to be in the film myself. I wanted to direct, and that was all I was interested. Now, mind you, now that I've done it, I'm thrilled that I did. I'm really glad I'm a part of the film now, you know, on the front of the camera as well as behind the camera. But it was my producing partner. He's like, no, you have to get in front of the camera too. I was like, oh, okay. So, but you know, once I made that decision I felt like that was really the right way to go. And so I could talk to people and say, you know, I'm going to be walking in the same shoes with you guys.
Where did the idea for the daughter, like your daughter in the movie, come from? Because that's not your actual daughter. That's in
the film. She's my granddaughter. Her name's Deborah Voorhees, and of course that portion is completely fictionalized. Mm-hmm. I felt like we needed somebody. I wanted one of our heroines to be able to do martial arts, and and I felt like, for me, when I'm watching a scary movie, nothing makes it scarier for me than if a child is in danger. And so to not have that young innocence, I mean, is there anything we want to protect more? I mean, you know, if it's a bunch of really big guys who are capable of taking care of themselves, fully locked and loaded, are you as worried as, you know, if it's a little kid who can't?
Yeah.
Or are you as worried? I think that's one of the reasons the movie Hush works so well. We have a young woman alone out in the middle of nowhere, and she can't hear, being stalked. You know, there's a vulnerability there. And so I think it's very important to have that vulnerability for a horror movie to really work.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree about that. And it's also, I think, that degree of relatability really like kicks in like a maternal or like a paternal instinct with it that really is intrinsically in everybody. I mean, to some degree, you know,
right.
a lot of people more than others, or, you know, like in that sense, but there is something deep inside you that wants to protect the vulnerable, that wants to protect children. I mean, also, I think a lot of times horror movies like to do it with pets too. Like,
yeah. I know. You put, hey, Scout, star of the movie right here. You remember him? Yes. Because he's so little and cute is one of the reasons he got the role. It wasn't just nepotism, I want you to know.
Hundreds of dogs came out to audition for the part. Scouts still got it.
But he was the right
one. Hundreds of dogs. See, now I can't see that hand motion out without thinking of the Trump impression that we keep seeing. Well, so we watched People Under the Stairs, and the dog is Wes Craven makes the dog kind of the villain, one of the villains, with Prince. And I recently got a puppy for the first time, like a month ago, and I realized that my reaction to that movie and that my reaction to the dog being like the villain, I think, in that sense, is a lot. Is different than it would have been before I got a dog. So it's
Right.
I think that that's something that I thought about a lot this week. Before we talked about it as our episode on Thursday.
Right.
JD, do you have questions that you wanted to ask?
Yeah, definitely. So first, I did not realize there's some deep cut cameos in this one, Deborah, including Drum Dums, the famous horror YouTuber, and Vincent DeSanti, who I was very happy to see. I'm a big fan of his work, Never Hike Alone. So you had some deep cuts for the horror fans here. What I was really interested in was, you're sort of playing around with the horror movie convention circuit and some of the fears that people have about, the horror movie convention circuit. And we've had real life incidents in the horror movie world where, there has been real stalkers for people. Danielle Harris, I think, from the Halloween movies had a stalker at one point.
Right.
So I was curious, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the convention circuit. I'm assuming most people at the convention circuit are pretty well-meaning. In my experience, they have been. But I mean, there is a difference between, I think you'll meet, people that can ask the awkward question or whatnot at a convention. I know I have, and it must be weird at times at a movie convention because, I remember I asked Dee Wallace about her work with Pet Network and her interviews of pet communicators. And she was she seemed like she was like, how do you know about that? And I think things like that can get really weird at horror conventions because, these people that go there like me are, huge super fans and they know everything about their movies and everything else. So maybe you could comment a little bit about the horror convention world and, how there's awkwardness and then at the worst end, creepiness at times.
Right. Well, and that's kind of how the whole thing started, was because my producing partner, Joel Paul Reisig, he asked me, what is it like at horror conventions? And he says, what are the horror fans like? And he had never been to one. He was like, are they scary? What are they like? And I was like, no, they're not scary at all. It's nothing creepy. I said, in fact, it's like hanging out with a bunch of grown-up kids who love Halloween. They're just fun. They love the costumes. I said, they're really fascinated with special effects. So no, it's not scary at all. And he goes, well, has anything really kind of scary happened? And I have to say, honestly, guys, I have not had anything negative happen at a horror convention. I've had a couple of people that I was starting to get a little uncomfortable with, because they kind of get in there a little too much, or I don't know. Most people will tell you at a horror convention, I'm very open. I'll hug people. I talk to them. I spend time with them. So you have to really invade my space to get me uncomfortable. And it really, considering the number of people that I've been around at a horror convention, the number who have been a little bit too pushy, it's minute. It's teeny, teeny, tiny. So I love the horror conventions. I love going and visiting and talking with you guys. And and given my role, I was a little nervous the first time I went because I was like, oh, how are they going to be? Are they going to be disrespectful or anything that's going to make me feel uncomfortable? And are you kidding? Oh my gosh. It's like meeting the church boys coming and saying hello, and they're so polite and nice and shake your hand. And they're like, can I, I'll get in here. Let me hug you. They're like, oh, okay. So it was like completely different. But what did happen that really sparked the whole thing is Joel asked me, Okay, so you haven't had a problem really at the horror conventions, but has there ever been anything? I said, well, okay, I did get a couple messages that really did bother me. And I said, one of them came over on Facebook Messenger, and it just said, wouldn't it be cool if you died in real life like you did in the movie? Well, you all know I got garden shears through the eyes. And, I would like to fall asleep and not wake up is kind of like my thought, much later in life when I'm really old, although I'm getting there. I'm pushing that old back further and further now. So that really creeped me out. I blocked that person. And as far as I know, that person hasn't tried to contact me again. If they did, it's under a different name or a different Facebook page or something. But the one that really got to me was I'm sitting in my office and it's late at night. My room is dark except for a single light. I'm working on a script and I have 2 French doors, so you can see right out. And I do live out in the country. And so it's just the woods out there. And I get a text message on my personal phone, not Messenger. The Facebook Messenger didn't bother me as much for simply that anybody could find me there. But the first message was, I'm watching you. And at that moment, they actually could have been watching. And then I get ding, ding, ding. And it becomes clear that he's pretending to be Jason and that he's there to kill me. And
yeah, that's absolutely terrifying.
That really did scare me. I blocked the person, nothing came of it. But my producing partner immediately said, that's our movie. No. That's scary. That's real life scary. That's the kind of thing that makes you afraid in the parking lot. I was thinking a monster movie, scary, where, you're not worried about the undead coming after you in the parking lot, right? So it's like these great scares are some of my favorite kind of movies, creature features, ghost movies, things like that. But man, that one got to me. It took me about 4 or 5 days before I was like, yeah, actually he's right. That is our movie.
Yeah,
And
no, I mean, it works really well as a concept, and there's a parasocial aspect to it too. I think, being online and having people at conventions, kind of creating these relationships with people like actresses and actors in movies and online, and having to interact in that way that's it's parasocial. It's not an interaction that it's an interaction with somebody that you've seen on a TV screen that you don't necessarily know, but there's this degree of I don't know, there's a degree of feeling like the person.
Right. It does add another layer of intimacy. And I'll be honest with you, I have become very good friends with people who started out as fans. And but because there's so many wonderful people in this world and so many wonderful people in the horror community. How can I be in part of it and not end up close to some of the people? But it does, if you have somebody maybe you've never met, but you talk to, or they comment on your post regularly and you comment back to them and that sort of thing, it does build an intimacy that where most of us understand, where that line is. I think that for some people, and I have a deep feeling of compassion for these people. So please don't think that I'm saying anything to be ugly, but I do think that sometimes the problem is a problem with the frontal cortex that helps you understand boundaries. And so it gives me a lot of empathy to think of it in that way, because I'm not going to get angry at somebody who has a heart problem and has a heart attack in front of me, right? It's so somebody who is having difficulties because of a problem, that's way different. Now, lots of people may have problems like that and still don't cross those boundaries. So usually I think there's probably a combination, which is why I created Fanboy the way I did, with that abusive background. And clearly he has very significant problems with drawing distinctions on who he really knows and who he doesn't, for him. But also you have to have some compassion for somebody who is locked away in a basement and their only connection with humans are the people in, the characters in the movies. So he sees them as characters. That's why he refers to them as their name in the movie, as opposed to he doesn't understand really fully that they're the actors. And so I think the most interesting monster is the monster that you can have at least some level of compassion for.
Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, if you create like a completely emotionless monster in a movie, I don't think it really resonates the same way, because, in that case, like, there's that level of intimacy that you have to have with a villain in order to feel like something is legitimately terrifying.
Right.
It walls it off. But I also think that as we get more online, and as social media becomes bigger and bigger, and that becomes the main source of a lot of people's interactions, it also does become harder to understand who you really know and who you don't, because everybody kind of becomes anonymous, or everybody kind of becomes an avatar. In a similar way to everybody, in a similar way to seeing characters in a movie, like you no longer see people as real people, and you also feel like you have these intimate connections to people that you've like never met in real life, or even if you have, it's for like a second. And so I kind of thought about, because I haven't really gone to horror conventions, but like as someone that comes out of the world of podcasting and has done like live shows and filming for it, and kind of seen like the way that people approach that kind of stuff, and then they get upset about something someone says online, and the next thing you know, they're like abusing somebody online viciously they've never met before, and that seems to be like a driving force.
I know. I see that all the time. And it's like, I know you would not say that to me or to somebody else if you walked into my home and I was graciously, offering you dinner and something to drink, or, something like that. But you get somebody online and they do feel that anonymity, and they will say really rude and ugly things and call each other names and stuff. I have a horror group and it's called Deborah Voorhees Sheer Horror. And that is the one thing that I'm really strict on is, we're not going to be abusive and ugly to each other. And if that's what you want, there's tons of horror groups out there. And if somebody else wants to allow it, that's great. And again, a couple times, it always cracks me up when they bring up like, oh, I have freedom of speech. And I'm like, darling, you don't know what freedom of speech is, darling. That doesn't mean you get to say what you want anywhere. It's not like you can walk into my home and be ugly to me. I'm going to ask you to leave, right?
Yeah, it's literally freedom of speech from government persecution. Like in legal cases, it's not
exactly. It doesn't mean that I have to sit there and be abused by you.
Yeah, no, it gets defined as like freedom from consequence from speech, which has never been a thing, like social consequence.
Right, exactly. No, I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. And for the most part, usually when you start talking to those people and you get past that angry facade that they keep up, most of the time, I would say 9 out of 10 times, I'm able to reach them and they're happy to stay and not do that anymore. But I'm more strict if they start getting ugly with somebody else in the group than I am if they get ugly with me. I'll put up with a bit more than I will if they're getting, really being mean to somebody in the group. Because you don't know who you're dealing with. You don't know how fragile that person might be. And frankly, honestly, I think the ones that come out and are bullies online, I think they're probably some of the most fragile.
Yeah, definitely. Like,
because just tell them that they're rude and they will come unglued. I'm just saying my opinion. It's like, you do realize that this person just said their opinion to you. Isn't that weird?
The craziest Facebook group that I'm a part of is my local town community page, because it's literally just like a small town grievance. It's turned into like a small town like grievance media page pretty much, and it's people like just relentlessly arguing with each other and saying like the most wild abusive things, even though there's moderators in it. And then you have to go into then you go into the community, and like you might actually be like standing next to that person online, and it's like, but that whole idea of like, respectfully disagreeing or respectfully debating something, or like the anger just boils over on social media for whatever reason.
It does. And I think to bring it back to the whole concept of like the fanboy thing, I do think that those types of arguments and stuff really feed into more of that stalkerish type mentality. And, it is right. I probably, if we do decide to do a second one, I'll probably bring social media into it more.
I actually just had one other question or one other thing I wanted to pick your brain about, Deborah, and then I know Forrest had one more question, but so what I found interesting is, and I know, everyone involved really loves the fans they meet at these conventions and whatnot, but I'm assuming too, for a lot of people that have been in horror movies or directed horror movies, the relationship to the horror genre itself can be bittersweet in some ways, because like what you did with Kane Hodder in the movie. I mean, there's a lot of actors and actresses I've met who, I don't know that horror is the first kind of movie they want to do, and I think a lot of times it can be kind of bittersweet, because you have all these fans, but also you don't always get the roles you want. You're sort of limited in your range by Hollywood typecasting, and you also comment a bit with the Corey Feldman character and some other characters on how some directors can be very sleazy and whatnot. So, do you think the movie sort of comments in a way on how? I think as an actor or an actress that is known for horror movies, you can have a bittersweet relationship to the genre in some ways. Does that sort of make sense?
It does make a lot of sense. And I think a lot of actors do feel that way. I will tell you from my perspective, yes, there were roles that I would have liked to have gotten, and for one reason or another didn't. And sometimes people who have been in horror movies, sometimes it's a jumping off point, and sometimes it keeps them in the single genre. I will tell you that if I only direct horror movies for the rest of my life, I will be just as happy as can be. To me, playing in that playground of special effects and blood and, the fake blood, obviously, it's just so much fun, because it's kind of like being a magician. You shoot this, and these different angles. Then you take that and you add the special effects, first the onset stuff, and then you do some color grading and add sound effects, and then the music and stuff. And suddenly something that wasn't scary at all is really scary. And that, to me, that's a blast. I mean, that is seriously fun.
I have a question on a similar subject, I think. Is it hard to see your own death on screen? Like, what is that? What is your relationship to that? Both, I mean, in this movie, but also, in previous, like in Friday the 13th, and you know what I mean? Like, is it hard? Do you feel your own mortality in that moment?
More so in the editing room. Now, when I did Friday the 13th, honestly, it didn't bother me at all. Now, my mother, my poor mama, she went to bed for 3 days because she was so depressed to see her daughter murdered like that. It was really upsetting to her. But for me, honestly, it didn't bother me one bit. But with Fanboy, and this isn't actually a spoiler because it's actually a part of our synopsis, does mention my death, is to go into the editing room and start doing that. And to me, the 13th Fanboy death is much more realistic. It's much more intense emotionally. And doing the cuts on that, it did get to me. Not anymore. Now it doesn't bother me. But initially, I definitely had to take a couple breathers. Yeah, definitely.
Well, because I mean, a reason that I asked that is we watched Psycho for our first movie on the watch through, and Janet Leigh
Yes.
was unable to take a shower for the rest of her life. Pretty much, she only could take baths because she felt like seeing herself get murdered in a shower, like permanently traumatized.
Right.
So
You know, and I have heard people where that sort of thing has. Now, for me, zero long term. I mean, I can watch it now and, you know, have a sandwich. You know? But I have to say, I've seen it a lot now.
I mean, she also probably, I mean, since it's like kind of one of the first proto slasher films, you know, I can understand that.
It was. It was. And for that time, it was absolutely shocking that they would put that on TV.
And the toilet.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was crazy to put that on there, or in the movie theater, I should say. It was just, they just didn't do it then. You know, remember the old Westerns? The people would fall off, bang, and they fall off. There's no blood anywhere in sight. Yeah. They're not a bullet wound, but they're.
And Psycho, interestingly, didn't really have that much blood in it. But the fact that, you know, Hitchcock kind of hints at you never actually see the knife go into.
No, you don't.
Which kind of makes it really interesting that the slasher genre has, like, we've kind of been tracking it through this month, and we've been following it. And we've kind of been going through like a lot of different slasher movies to kind of trace some of these tropes, and it's been a fun month of doing that.
Right. So what is it like? Something like for that shower scene, I think it was like 100 and something cuts.
Yeah, no,
that's what I was told. I want to sit there and go frame by frame and count them.
Yeah, no,
that's right.
It's either 30 something or it's 100 something. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah. I was just gonna add to that too. I'm assuming working for Hitchcock could also be very traumatizing based on stories I've heard from actors like Bill Mumy. Working as a kid for Hitchcock was apparently a nightmare. And I was gonna say I like that part of the movie too, where you comment on, you know, there are directors that can get very, very sleazy with these movies, and it's such a sad thing. You know, I've heard some stories from different actresses over the years, and it's really, you know, some movies I don't like watching now because now I know things about the directors that I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch this. Yeah.
Right, when you went into auditions, oh my God, the
52
stories.
Cuts, by the way, 52 cuts in the shower scene. Yeah, but casting Corey Feldman in that role as like the creepy producer was an amazing casting choice, I think, because I mean he's had his long like sad history with his own abuse and, you know, like everything that comes along with that. So kind of having him as the, like, no, you forget that it's Corey Feldman because he's not, you know, he's like the one person that isn't playing themselves.
Right. Didn't
he was
really
good.
embody that character?
Yeah.
He was fantastic. Yes.
I think so too. I'll tell you something really interesting about that. I gave Corey a script. And then he took the script and he looked at it and got the gist of it and he went, chewing. And he came in and improvised the whole thing, which you would think would be a director's nightmare. But instead he was just shooting out gold, absolute gold. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to make this work. This is brilliant.
You have to wonder if there's like a level of catharsis, I guess, that goes along with that because, you know, he's
well, you know, and as you pointed out, he is one of the characters who wasn't playing himself. That character is nothing like Corey, you know, but that's also what he did such a brilliant job on it. I mean, I don't think you would ever doubt him for 2 seconds. I don't know if you ever noticed this or not, but he actually stiffed the young girl. He never paid for his picture, which I thought was really funny.
So just so we can get this out of the way, I know you worked on Friday the 13th Part 5 with Danny Steinman. So people are going to try to do like a meta thing here and be like, is Corey Feldman supposed to be like Danny Steinman? Because Danny, he was known for working on adult films. But
Right.
I want to get that out of the way. Is that what you're going for or not?
Not at all. Danny was nothing like that. I know that there have been people with complaints and stuff about him, but I will not be one to add to that. He was always very nice to me. What in that time period, I find it really actually comical that anybody even brings it up, that he did porn films. I never knew a director that didn't. At some point, they had to pay the bills.
Well, Wes Craven worked on porn films before he got mainstream. Yeah.
Does everybody say that every time you turn around and go, oh, they did porn? No, that was just the norm. You know, you did that to bring in some money, and then you did some of the other things you wanted to do.
Yeah. Do you think that? All right. So I had a question along, I guess, these lines with the Corey Feldman character. And kind of, the Me Too moment that happened with, like, where really creepy producers like Harvey Weinstein got exposed as, having decades of abuse in like big
Right.
Hollywood like studios. Do you think that in the independent film world it's been more like, you think that kind of person is more able to exploit the situation because the money is kind of needed so badly, which is what the whole thing about putting up the $100,000, then I could, like, he could do anything he wants to me, $100,000, like
Right.
that
And of course, that was also, though, that's also a hairdresser's opinion. But
yeah.
did anybody stop him? No, apparently not. Not in our film. They didn't. That's a really interesting question. I don't know. It's so hard to say. I mean, I worked for really good people, and some, that I've had experiences with, not so great. I won't say who it was, but I was in a situation once where I was in an audition, and it definitely was asking for, favors beyond what I was going to do. And it basically was offered the role. They liked me well enough, and I remember the door being shut on me and trying to hold it shut. I was like, I'm out of here. And I just, stuck to my guns. I mean, if you're a young woman in Hollywood, you better know the word no.
Yeah.
And be able to state it very strongly at times. But it's
and that's something that's been.
I really can't see it as being worse in the indie world. I think if I were going to guess, and I'm just going to guess, that it's going to be worse anywhere where there's a lot of power.
Yeah. Well, and that's like a thing since the beginning of Hollywood, like the casting couch has been, I mean, for decades, it was kind of, unspoken, I guess, but like everybody kind of understood, like, people were trying to, pressure actresses into sleeping with them for a part. I mean, some of the most powerful, like producers and filmmakers in like Hollywood history famously had, these actresses that, like, they had affairs with and slept with, like, parts and all this stuff. I think that the Me Too movement was that coming home to finally roost after like 100 years of that being a being a regular practice.
Well,
But
I will say that I think that most of the time that the directors or producers are offering something like that, I never even took them seriously. I always felt like it was kind of a way of trying to scam a woman, because it wouldn't make sense to give a role for that. But I think there's got to be a huge distinction between two people who really are attracted to each other and want to go out and date, and that one just happens to be. Now you're not supposed to date your boss at all, but in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s even, that was just kind of a norm, you know. I understand the reason for not doing it because there is a power difference there, but at the same time, it's also kind of touchy because what if you just happen to fall in love with your boss? You
Yeah.
know,
And I think that
that happens.
having I mean, constant scrutiny of actresses and different people working on sets, and I think a lot of people project their own experiences into things too, where it's like, well, look at the
Right.
power differential there. And I think that like social media is a perfect place that this happens all the time. Someone's like, well, I like there'll be like a relation, like you'll see celebrity relationship drama and people are like, well, I just think, and it's like, you don't know these people, you've never met these people.
Right.
You're projecting your own experiences into like people you've never met
Right.
on whatever. And I think that there was a lot of that in all of these situations.
Exactly.
So I had one final question because I know that I said we're going to end it at 40 minutes. So my last question, I guess, and I'm sure this is going to be brought up a lot. That scene with the with your granddaughter and the retractable knife that doesn't retract, and she like someone actually gets murdered. The Helena Hutchins death on the set of Rust.
Oh
That
God, I know.
happened.
I know.
I wanted to ask about kind of labor conditions and whether you think that well, because on a set like that, I mean, a big part of it was safety, and the union crew had walked off, and
Right.
do you think that having people personally, I guess, responsible for those safety checks as an actress on like on lower budget kind of indie films, like, or I guess I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I can tell you first of all, the any kind of whether it's a prop gun or anything along that line, or a prop knife or anything along that line, should never be left out where the general group can get to it. I also don't think we have any reason to have any kind of live rounds or even fake rounds, because even the fake ones can actually, if it hits just right, can actually kill somebody. And right now, especially with the digital world that we have, you really can make it look as realistic as a fake one. So there's a lot of things that went wrong on that set. I wasn't there, so I don't want to, point fingers. I can't do that. That would be wrong of
Yeah, I
me.
wasn't
But
asking that side of it. I was asking more about, I think, labor conditions and the conversation around. I mean, I think that the conversation around having firearms on sets is one that probably should be had. But like my thoughts on stuff, I guess, is that I'm more interested in the the fact that like the crew had walked off because of unsafe labor conditions. They felt like, what I mean, long hours, not being able to
I don't know why they walked off. I know what that's been reported and what people have said. I don't know what the real situation is there. I know that I pretty much, even if I'm not, I don't have a union crew, I still go by basic union rules, just because there's just some smart things about, when to cut it off. Or if we do have to run a long day, then make sure they have the day off the next day so everybody can kind of regroup. And make sure that they have plenty of sleep and stuff. Make sure nobody's having to drive very far.
Yeah,
And
and I'm sure that was a big one. I mean, I don't, this specific incident obviously is incredibly tragic, and I don't know necessarily the details, but like the working conditions side of it, I have to imagine that people are getting like worked into the ground and having like and then throwing like a firearm into
right. I have never, it looks like I'm getting some really weird light. Let me go over here for a second. There we go. That's much better. I think we have, in a normal film day, it's a 12-hour day plus 1 hour for lunch kind of thing. So that's a normal day in filmmaking. Some of the reason is because it takes so long to get lights and everything set up, and to get to your location and get everything done, that by the time you get there, you still need plenty of time to then do your rehearsal. And there's kind of like this dance with the camera and this sort of thing. And so, do we need to have some shorter hours? I don't know. I think it can be really difficult for, let's say, a group who does it all the time. And so they're constantly working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. That's when it really starts to get tough. If you have an individual film like my own, where, yes, as a director, I run absolutely ungodly hours, but I'm the only one making myself do it.
Yeah.
But I did always try to make sure that my cast and crew had plenty of time to regroup and do what they needed to do. But it's very different for me to do it for a period of time as opposed to that I'm doing this every day as a career. That's totally different.
Yeah, completely.
So
Understand
I don't know, we need to make some changes there. I don't know. I don't know what their real situation was there. I've been on around this world too many times, and I've heard people exaggerate and talk about things in ways that just flat out weren't true. And so I don't know what the truth is here. But do I know that there are sets that you run these horrible hours and that it's dangerous for people? Oh yeah, absolutely, it happens.
I was gonna add real quick. The interesting thing about me for that scene was, you have Vincent DeSantis' character in that scene, and he goes to Kelsey and basically says, I want you to be in this movie, and she gets really angry and says,
right,
you're just trying to exploit this tragedy. And since Forrest mentioned the Alec Baldwin thing, I was reminded by that incident of this whole thing that happened with Brandon Lee and The Crow. And it was interesting because I've talked to people that have been involved in the film world, and they'll say, that whole stuff about the Crow curse,
right,
it's sort of, exploitative, because really the problems had to do with labor regulations on set and whatnot.
right.
Rather than some kind of supernatural curse, and in a way, the idea of the curse helped promote the film. So I was wondering, just briefly, if you could comment on this issue of, exploiting real life tragedies within Hollywood.
Well, sometimes they exploit real life tragedies, and sometimes it's about exploiting things that never happened in the first place. I have to say that people very often do say things because it adds some sex appeal. I don't mean it literally sex appeal, but it makes it a kind of a sexy situation. Oh, it's titillating. Oh, this is what happened. Oh my gosh, this is awful. This is terrible. Can you believe that happened, kind of thing. As opposed to, no, everything was really fine on set and everybody was really nice to each other. Not such an interesting story, right? We're kind of geared to want to hear the dirt. Oh, what really happened? What really went down, right? And so I don't know. I always take whatever I hear with a grain of salt. I need to actually hear it directly from the person who supposedly did whatever they're claiming was done. I know that on, for my particular scene for Friday the 13th, there was a lot of rumors that Danny was not appropriate, that he made some really ugly remarks and this and that. And I'm sorry, I was there. It just is flat out lies, flat out. And, if there was any whispering and, they were saying like he was yelling this really ugly things, I was there. Could it have been under his breath over here sometime? I suppose that's possible. But it's really not a big deal, guys. I think we can all get over it. I was treated very well on set. I was not abused or anybody wasn't mean to me. And so I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Coming from my perspective, I have seen people lie about stuff like this so many times that I'm always have kind of a healthy skepticism toward it. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means I've seen it both ways. And so, but I will tell you that watching that scene with Kelsey, and actually, this is a kind of a spoiler, so I don't know what to do with that. I mean, but it was much harder when it was fresh from what had happened on the Alec Baldwin set. The reality is, if you have guns around, and think about all the film sets that go on everywhere, and how many accidents there are. In real life, there are very few. But if you're going to have a gun on set and it's loaded, accidents are going to happen.
Yeah. Well, I also think that making it directly about the gun part of it, in some ways, I think it's been exploited by media in not wanting to talk about the labor conditions part of it. So it becomes, it very quickly becomes a conversation about having guns on set and whether it's like, because I noticed the conversation went from first talking about like what the crew was actually asking for,
Right.
like which is like being able to live closer to the set when they're filming, like accommodations. They were asking for
Right.
less hours because they were doing long days and better safety checks. But all of that, all of a sudden, it's just the gun. It's like, oh well, we shouldn't have guns on set, which I don't necessarily disagree with. It's interesting that the narrative, I think, around something as high profile as this very quickly, when it comes down to labor regulations, all of a sudden,
Right.
like,
Well, the
how can we
stories that
not-
I've read on it have dealt very directly with the labor conditions. Maybe sometimes on broadcast news, things are really fast, and so they only get to just some kind of basic things. But I do a lot of, reading and things like the New York Times, The Economist, the Washington Post, that type of thing. And they definitely did cover the labor issues in there. And, but if you have a loaded gun on the set, that's your first mistake.
Yeah.
We had several guns on our set. We did not have a live round anywhere near the gun. There wasn't one on the set, period, ever, at any time. There's no point in it. There's no need for it. Not in today's world. There was a time you couldn't make it look realistic without actually firing it, but that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you can literally also just put like a sound effect in of a gunshot and have somebody.
You can do the sound effect, but you can also you can make it look with the CGI. You can see the bullet and the smoke. I mean, let's face it, the fake ones, when you shoot them, they don't look that real.
Yeah.
So, the real ones are about the only thing. But if you're pointing something like that right at the camera,
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a gun and a weapon in there and have a block right in the barrel and no way of opening it. So you can't have like real live rounds in there and nobody's going to know the difference.
Yeah.
So, and then, are people overly tired? I mean, I just have to wonder, why was it even right there in a tray where that AD should have never walked over and touched that gun. But why was it there where you could touch that gun?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the specifics of, I think, that situation, because I've read a bunch of stuff about it, but like it does seem like
basically that's what's been said, is that the AD went over and got it and it should have never been there in the first place.
Yeah. They also
for like the example for our guns on set, we had one person handling it. That what you do is you show the gun, you show the entire crew, you open it and you show that it's completely empty, nothing is in there. You triple, double, quadruple check it several different times during it. And you don't ever guns are just, they're not toys.
Yeah. And it seems like
And so your
whatever.
biggest problem would be is even if, let's say, I don't have a live round on set, but say somebody on set decided to do something and put a bullet in there. So to avoid that, that's when you make sure you double, triple, quadruple
Yeah, it
check.
seems like they skipped basic safety checks, assumably
Mhm.
on that set, which I don't know.
Mhm.
I as you said, like I wasn't, no, none of us were there, but I
Right.
do think that the labor conditions part of the story, I think, because that's been happening. There's been a lot of frayed tensions since film shoots have been back in general with COVID and everything, where
Right.
all like a lot of different film unions have been saying, hey, like conditions right now are particularly unsafe. Let's have
Right.
conditions get better. And I think that this is kind of the pinnacle of that moment on a lot of different film sets.
Right.
And then of course there's like a tragic accident that everyone now is talking about it when yeah.
Just as a wrap up point, I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation because I think in ways, and I don't know what you think about this, Deborah, but I think in a lot of ways, 13 Fanboy makes you think about a lot of different things. I mean, mentioning sleazy producers or producers that want to exploit a tragedy and all this, that all plays into the movie. And I think the movie really does get you thinking about those things. And one thing I really liked about the movie is, the kills in it aren't the same as what you would see in a lot of like 80s slasher movies. It's not done in this sensational sort of way. And I think it really gets you as a viewer to reflect on, hey, there's a difference between real life violence and a violence in an 80s movie. And it makes us think about exploitation a lot more and, how these things can be very bad. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because I think the reason that a lot of people really enjoy things like Friday the 13th is because you're not really taking it terribly seriously. It's fun. It's fun silliness. I mean, you go in and watch a Friday the 13th movie with a live crowd that loves it. They're laughing as much as they're jumping, if not laughing more. And it's because, that goes back to how much the fan really enjoys looking at the special effects and how they work. And, oh, was that realistic, or did it look cheesy, or did it look real, or whatever? And whereas, like, for example, my death in this film in 13 Fanboy, it feels very real. You don't have, it's not that instant death. In a lot of the Friday the 13th, the second the person is shot, they're done for. There's not the dying process that would actually happen in real life.
Yeah, and as you're thinking about kill count, it kind of gets more and more. I mean, in something like Friday the 13th, like it gets more and more like, oh, like how many ways can we kill someone? You know what I mean? And how many bodies can we rack up in this movie? Instead of thinking about it in terms of like, oh no, this is a real person that's literally like bleeding out in front of you.
Right. Yeah, you guys have asked some really interesting questions. You've really done your homework on this. I usually can pretty much predict all the questions that I'll be asked.
I think that
you definitely threw me some new ones. That's good.
We try to do that. I think. I mean, at least when I'm writing up questions, I'm like, I don't want to ask someone the same, because I mean, we've done an entire slasher month, and we've watched so many slasher movies, so I've been thinking about them nonstop already.
Right.
And then on top of that, it's like I hear a lot of like either podcasts, movie podcasts, or like interviews, and it seems like it's almost like reading from a script, and I don't like I like having like conversations that are more dynamic, where I'm like, I want to try to ask someone something that they're probably not asked as often.
Right. Yeah, no, y'all have done quite a good job. I really am impressed.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. I'm gonna end the broadcast, and then but I enjoyed watching 13 Fanboy, and it was an interesting experience. I don't necessarily think that I'm the audience intended, because like I'm not someone that's watched every single Friday the 13th movie.
See, that's me you're talking about
and
there.
it's Andy, and that's Andy too. Like, you know, like so. But I thought a lot after watching it, and I thought a lot about you know labor conditions and exploitation, and you know
Right.
the Me Too movement, like the sexual exploitation side of it. So it was a movie that does, I think, JG's 100% right. It does make you think.
I did feel like my audience was more, you know, the person who loves like Friday the 13th, Halloween, slashers, that type of thing. But I have definitely had many people who, even some people who were not necessarily horror fans, still like it. So that's been interesting to me, you know, to see who is liking. Of course, by far the majority, of course, are hardcore horror fans. You know?
Ironically, the majority of the people that probably are the intended audience are the same people that would end up being the guy that you know goes around killing everybody.
Well, you know, I did have a guy who I am totally baffled where he came up with this, but he really believes that Fanboy was written about him.
Really?
Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
going, okay, so I know
I'm
you're
pretty
not
sure that the red flags, like that's the red
yeah,
flag.
I know. You're not in Friday the 13th. So you identify with the serial killer stalker? Is that it? And it's like, yeah, okay, bye.
All right. Well, thank you for coming on. I enjoyed this conversation a lot. And
Thank you.
I enjoyed thinking about this movie a lot too. So, all right, I'm gonna cut it there.